Welcome to another Hangouts with Hess and Yates. We're gonna rotate back from the debate format to just a bit of a hangout, but still some good topics scheduled for today. I'm looking forward to this one. This is one that I know I pondered a lot studying animal rights. That I'm curious to hear what others' thoughts are, especially yours, Roger.
Hello, everyone. You beautiful people, you.
Yeah, hello, Bernie. And if you are joining us, do let us know in the chat because that's how we know who's here. And if you could just, if there is anybody else interested, in the next hour, we're basically going to be talking about this whole idea of species hierarchy. Because I think as animal advocates, for the most part, we are generally resistant to the idea, but there's some specific nuances that I think would really help to explore. You know, specifically if someone challenges us and says, you know, do you think humans are, you know, more valuable, equal, and all this kind of stuff. So if you know anyone interested in those topics and basically how we can help dismantle human superiority, drop them a link with the video because it those algorithms aren't very vegan friendly, as we've learned.
Yeah, smash a like, folks.
Smash a like.
We were talking about the language you're supposed to use as hip YouTubers. We just can't do it, really, can we? We can't get it right.
And those who are joining, I will try to make a note towards the end of the show, but just in case I forget, there's at 7 p.m. Michelle Lowe will be doing an open mic on use of the H word, which for those of you who were with us last week, we obviously went into an in-depth discussion on that. And hopefully everyone's had a chance to kind of ferment a little bit on that.
The hello word is hello.
The hello?
Yeah.
is the H word hummus? Is that the word we have to talk about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I'll probably try to jump on that myself because I know I've been doing a lot of research. And yeah, I'm keen to keep exploring it because it's an interesting one really because it does beg the question like how much are we actually being distracted and not doing other animal advocacy work?
Research. We've been obsessing with it. No man, research.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
Well, because it is an interesting thing. Because on the animal rights show, we oftentimes deal with movement issues, and it's just is that helpful or is it more of a distracting thing? I don't know. Hello, Michael, Nella, Maz, Jennifer, Ronnie, Tabitha. H for Hess, Ronnie says.
Maz and Amber. Maz the Gob. I like that. That's a good name, isn't it? Maz
hello, Kristen. Yes. Hello. Great to see some familiar names. I think a couple new ones. So yeah, what we'd like to do is start off with a quick opening video just to help frame the conversation because one question that I think boils into this bigger topic. Yes. Hello, Deb. Is whether or not other animals see species and specifically if they do, how they see other species. So what we're going to do is play a short video clip from Dodo, who I'm sure most of you are, if not all of you, are familiar with, but it's towards the end of the video where they're covering this rescue and basically two individuals coming to the sanctuary for the first time from different species and just looking at their interaction with each other. And then afterwards we'll break down kind of how they view species and maybe that could help teach us some things as animal advocates for how we should.
Is this Dodo thing the website, Jeremy, that you're talking about? Because I always think some of their videos look a bit staged. I know that's a separate matter, but they always look a little bit set up, don't they? Sometimes I always worry about some of these videos. You see all over the place. So and so made friends with so and so and all that. I'm always a bit suspicious.
There's always human-centric framing, and I'm guilty of that myself because I think it's difficult. We have a human audience, so if we don't frame things in a way a human audience is going to understand, it gets tricky. But I know it's difficult water to navigate. But maybe let's see what the video has to show us first.
Yes, let's.
After quarantine, they will have about 45 acres to roam around in. I'm free. They all do that little happy dance when they feel grass, pure joy. It's a whole new world for him, isn't it?
And now he's kind of looking around going, wow.
Go ahead, buddy. It's okay. You can have all you want.
I don't think he's even noticed all the friends over here. You see your new little friend? to see all the other cows. I think that's when he finally realized, I'm safe. This is my life now.
How you doing, buddy? The last 2 calves I rescued. This is the first time I've seen them. This is why I do what I do.
Yes, I
You're gonna like this one.
She's gonna look for him. A piglet and a calf seem like an unlikely duo, but they're both so resilient, and I think that helped them connect and find comfort in each other.
It's like, no, we're not done playing. Cows are looking at her like, what is that? Very, very confused. Marley finally discovered pigs over there.
Couldn't have left you in a better place. See you later. So happy that you don't even notice I'm leaving. Seeing the love that they're surrounded by, it's worth the drive, the phone calls, the manure in my car. It's all worth it.
Marley and Eli just have this family bond thing. He's like, yeah, she has this weird obsession with dirt.
You got a little bit muddy.
But, she's mine. She doesn't really understand why he's so obsessed with hay, but, he's hers. So they accept one another. They helped each other.
Now she's fearless. She knows what she wants, and she goes after it.
If it's possible, Eli is getting even sweeter. Love is that X factor that helps them recover.
How cute. They will always be loved, and they will grow old. Now they have a couple of other friends. They're not too sure about Marley at first. But now everybody's pretty good friends.
When they first arrived, they were orphans and they chose one another. And sometimes, your chosen family is just as strong as your original family. And that's what it's become for them.
We've been asked to post the URL for the video.
I can do that. I'll do it after the video publishes, so everyone can watch the full, because that's the last kind of 3 minutes of a 12-minute video. But yeah, it's kind of stood out to me. And just a quick reminder for you, Roger. My mom says this isn't a debate.
Who says that?
I think that was it. So you could disagree with it. Disagree with the comment. Yeah.
I dispute whether this is a debate or not.
Gonna challenge that. But yeah, that clip really stood out to me because I think for any of us who, not just through videos but through firsthand experience visiting Sanctuary, when I'm at Friend, I don't necessarily see much difference between the species. Like, I think within other animals, they might notice some differences, but they certainly don't discriminate, at least from what I can tell. Obviously, some individuals get along more than others, but I don't think they think, oh, they're chickens, so I'm not going to hang out with them. And I'm just curious, like, as animal advocates, like, one of the key questions we get is, like, the whole, you're trying to say animals are equal to humans, or, that kind of thing, specifically other animals. And I think we should actually, I think I, at first, would swerve that and say, oh, no, not equal, just some moral value. Whereas I think I'd reframe that now to be just all have basic moral value, specifically all animals. So how would you respond to that one on the street, Roger? Would you say that yes, humans are, superior, but other animals still have value?
That has changed, isn't it? I mean, like, in different but equal is one thing, but then you've got the issue that I think arose originally in Singer and Ryder's work, which is that we're not talking about equal treatment, we talk about equal consideration. And then you've got big. If I remember right, the example given in Animal Liberation was that if you slapped or you struck the behind, as it were, of a horse with the same force as you struck a child, then it's going to be more meaningful and harmful for the child than the horse. And so I think they were talking about equal consideration doesn't necessarily equal treatment. Does that make sense?
So that's animal liberation, you said that is?
Yeah, you know that Peter Singer
Well,
guy.
that's utilitarianism, isn't it?
The father of our movement.
Well, that is the utilitarianism thing, isn't it? Because, and that's a key distinction between that and rights is these shades, the spectrum, or as we frame this video, species hierarchy. Whereas I personally think we should just chuck all that out and just be very straightforward, all animals. Because I think when we start, getting this whole line drawing thing, and if we play that game, we're automatically inviting people to assign different value to different individuals, depending on their species membership. And I think that's shooting ourselves in the foot.
I think the way that Reagan and Ryder would put that is that there should be no line drawing until you get to what we call the grey areas. And I know this is going to be where we're going to focus the talk, probably, in the sense that in terms of issues like sentiency, subjective life, then there are grey areas. And of course, the reason it comes up is because if you're talking about animal rights to people, they immediately move to the periphery. But then again, if you're in any kind of debate with somebody, they move to the periphery because in some sense, testing the periphery helps them decide whether the core argument has got any validity. So that's why they do it. And in relation to the debates that we get into, they say, oh, well, are you talking about insects then? And what about plants? That they go to those kind of areas where they think there's the kind of, where do you draw the line in relation to this animal rights thing? In the sense that I've often said that the phrase animal rights, in theory, doesn't cover all other animals because it's either based on subject of a life or being sentient. So the ones
haven't we outgrown that? Sorry to jump in.
I don't know. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about, isn't it? That's the idea.
Is that what we're doing today?
You're making it into a debate, Kristen. Tell him, Kristen.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know many modern day activists who would be familiar with the subject of a life stuff. But back to your earlier point about gray areas, because
sentiency, though, don't they?
Well, and we talked about that a bit, I think last week, just touched on it. I mean, to me, I think it's just all animals who experience life is a simpler framing. Because I don't know, if we have to go through the effort of explaining sentiency, I don't know that that's really as relatable. Because, I mean, as Ronnie raised in a Q&A, or, the open mic last week, like using words that people understand, that we don't have to explain new words, I think is a really strong point.
Yeah, well, again, that's an interesting one because I think there was some initial pushback against sentience, using sentience, because I suppose everybody was used to Reagan. But I think the reason for that was the fact that sentience was often just defined as feeling pain, and then there was then a realization that sentiency means more than that. And then you've got the distinction between sentient and sapient. And in some senses, you could argue that sapient and subject to a life are closer than sentient and subject to a life, perhaps. You might be able to do that. I mean, like Francione will criticize Reagan for subject to a life being too restricted and complicated, whereas sentiency, he thinks, is quite simple. But actually, sentiency, I mean, people argue about what sentiency means. In terms, yeah.
Because you mentioned pain,
awareness, those kind of things.
I think that's a thing, because I know this is something I've grappled with a lot myself, because if we start to use language to build a case for animal rights, and we start talking about, well, they can suffer, they can feel pain, we open ourselves up to the utilitarian animal welfare paradigm, saying we're just reducing suffering, because we don't want to just reduce suffering. That's not what we're about.
Yeah,
but we can send that message.
Your solution, as I understand it, Jeremy, doesn't work. The fact that...
Well, I hope it does. Otherwise, I'm wasting a heck of a lot of time.
No, but weren't you saying that you say those who are alive? And then that's going to immediately... I mean, surely if you tried that on the street, people would immediately jump to plants, wouldn't they?
All animals who experience life are unique individuals who are worthy of respect, would be kind of my general tagline.
And wouldn't people then go to, well, plants are alive. Do you include them as well?
They're not animals. That's where the all animals.
So what's the moral difference?
between plants and animals? I mean, we could have that discussion. I mean, we're going to get the plants feel pain thing regardless, I think, from people, because I think this is an interesting thing, because when people come up to us on the street, chances are they've engaged with the topic of veganism on some level. So they probably already have a few cards. Well, but I mean, it's something basic. Like they probably already have a few cards already pull out. And if one of them is plants feel pain, that's going to be played either way.
I don't think the bacon people do that. Bacon. I don't think they've.
That's all the only card they have. Ronnie's got an interesting question about the kind of building off that opening video. Other animals don't practice speciesism. They don't regard themselves as superior to other species. Humans are the only species that possess that arrogance. Because I think that's what it is, and I think we could learn a lot. Because I know I've been guilty of this myself, as kind of working within that human superiority framework and saying, oh, no, humans are better. It's just other animals matter too. Versus actually just, basic moral rights level, we are equal. Like being willing to just put that flag in the sand.
Of course, that claim from Ronnie would be disputed. I mean, people like Rose, I can't remember his first name, Stephen Rose, who was one of the panelists of the Reagan thing, the animal rights debate. And so if you go to the summary, if you go to YouTube, go Tom Reagan summary, you should get the summary of the 1989 debate. Now, most people are more familiar with the opening statement, which is a kind of quintessential animal rights statement, right? But there's a longer summary, and the summary includes the beginning bits of the summary, actually uses some of the arguments of the people opposed to Reagan. And I think Stephen Rose argues that other animals are speciesist. And he says that he himself is proud to be speciesist. And the animal behaviorists used to interpret that by meaning that other animals kind of it's all a bit of a me thing with other animals. But if they do seem to have any kind of moral concern or familial concern or societal concern, it would be with their own species. But all of that has been challenged now by things like cognitive ethology.
Well, what I've observed at Friend is there's definitely generally a partnering, or sometimes more than two, but typically two individuals will stick together. They'll sleep next to each other. They'll explore the grounds together. In fact, some you'll rarely see them apart. But that's more an individual thing than a species thing, I think. I think
you're talking about a sanctuary, though. You're talking about in the sanctuary. See, that's a very artificial setup in the first place. I mean, the film is artificial, isn't it?
Oh, you're talking this one.
No, I'm just talking about you're talking about other animals interacting in a sanctuary. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Just from my observations, I guess the point being that, like, while they might notice someone's a bit shorter, or maybe they fly and I don't, those kinds of things. But to Ronnie's point, I don't think they think, oh, I'm better than them, or that I could exert my control over them like we do to our fellow animals.
No. Well, I suppose when the calf was first meeting the piglet, maybe they were both thinking, is this one good to eat? Maybe that was a thought.
I suspect not.
Well, I mean, again, if you go to the kind of standard kind of ideas about what other animals are all about, survival of the species, food, reproduction, these kind of things. Like I say, we've moved away from all that now, and so there has been a move. I mean, it's not a concession. I'm just saying there's been a move in terms of kind of judging who other animals are.
Well, I think there's a lot of work, I think, to unpack our own speciesism, because I know it's a perpetual process for me, because I like Maz's point here that don't necessarily need to like someone, but to respect their rights, kind of thing, and respect them as individuals.
Well, yeah, that's a bit.
Should we play? We may as well play the Ronnie clip, the Reagan clip.
The Ronnie Reagan clip.
The Ronnie Reagan. Yeah,
the Tom Lee clip. Let's play that.
This is one example of how Reagan responds to the question, so it might help generate some dialogue. What do you say? Give it a go?
Yeah, why not?
All right, here we go.
Lots of people will say, I would never eat an ape because, they're so like us. Sure. And other people say, I never eat my pet dog because I know my dog has an intelligence and I like my dog and my dog likes me.
Sure.
But what about the wasp? What about the mosquito?
Right.
Where do you stop in terms of affording respect to other living creatures on the earth?
I think that is a profoundly difficult question, and I always say that wherever you draw the line, draw it with pencil, because you might want to erase it because you find something out that you didn't know before.
But where do you draw the line?
Yeah, where I draw the line is with animals where we have sufficiently good reason to think that they're not only in the world, but aware of the world, and aware of what happens to them, and that what happens to them matters to them, and in particular, that they can experience pain and pleasure, fear, and relief. So where that is, I'm not sure exactly, but it certainly is the case that the animals that are raised, commercially raised for our food, cattle, sheep, hogs, those animals, chickens, certainly are above the line wherever any reasonable person would draw it. What you do about mollusk and oysters and so on, I don't know. But I give them the benefit of the doubt because I have no reason to eat.
Yes, and that's
that benefit of the doubt thing is a common strategy, if you like. See, Reagan wouldn't answer the question, would he? You know, that's a profoundly difficult question. No, he should have held them to account. That's what he should have done.
Well, there's a few things I think to pick out. I mean, I have to make the point around speciesist language, which I appreciate. You may know the year of that clip, but it's been a fair while, obviously.
Yeah, 2001, I think it was.
Okay, but yeah, I mean the whole use of cattle and hogs, I would obviously want to move away from because that distances us from their individuality. But yeah, I don't know. I think just the whole, back to my earlier point, like this whole line drawing, like why don't we just draw a circle around all animals, individuals worthy of respect, and then we don't have to erase it, to Reagan's point. Because
that's not the criteria of animal rights. I mean, that's what I was saying. There is a kind of irony that the category animal is not the criteria of animal rights.
Well, I don't think a lot of people know the criteria of animal rights, including animal rights advocates. I know I didn't until I did an in-depth dive of it. I'm just wondering if we're overcomplicating things with some of these discussions. You know what I mean?
You choose the topic this week. Hey, let's make it a debate, folks.
We do gravitate. Well, it's yeah. I mean, it's interesting to explore the areas where we see things slightly differently. I think that's where we can evolve ideas. If we just agreed all the time, it'd be pretty boring.
No. Yeah, but I mean, going to Reagan's clip. I mean, Reagan's clip was very similar to the thing that doesn't exist anymore. I tell you, one of my great regrets in my life is that I used to have a video of the entire arena debate thing that Reagan, not that one we show, but the Reagan 1989 thing was taken from. In that, Ryder gets challenged with where do you draw the line, and he was basically saying, well, we acknowledge in animal rights theory kind of thing that there is some grey areas, which is what Reagan is saying, that there are some things that science is not so clear about in relation to who is and who isn't a subject of a life, or who is and who isn't sentient. That's been the criteria of the theory of animal rights, not, oh, you're classified as an animal and so therefore you're in. That's never been the case. There's always been line drawing, and then the reason about the pencil is because our knowledge is going to change, and so the line's going to change. I mean, that makes sense. Surely it makes sense, doesn't it?
The whole what happens to them matters them, and then experience pain, pleasure, and relief and these kinds of things. I mean, isn't the whole point that if we breed them into existence for net negative life, that is wrong? I mean, because there's no mention of breeding or net negative life. It's all talking about the positives of, well, I guess, obviously pain's not, but I mean, it kind of misses the point about them experiencing pleasure because they shouldn't be bred in the first place.
No, I think you're missing the point there. I think you're switching the argument a little bit there, because if Reagan says that famous thing about, those other animals whose life matters to them, they're in the world, they're aware of the world, what happens to them matters, all that kind of thing, right? Now, if you flip that and said, they're not aware of being in the world, and what happens to them doesn't matter to them. That's where the problem is, because there are some, it's alleged, it's argued, science says, blah blah blah, there are some other animals that don't care what happens to them because they can't feel anything, like plants.
But plants aren't animals, though. That's it. That, we keep coming back to that, but I feel like I need to change this. Debates with Hess and Yates. This is no longer a hangout. Where's the opening poll? Get everyone's opinions before we start.
It didn't get you the problem though, Jeremy. Just by saying plants and animals are not the same. I mean, in some ways, the argument is that if you're using those criteria, subjective life or sentiency, there are some other animals who are in the kind of plant category. In the sense that, you know, some people have argued against animal rights by saying, you do know that yeast is an animal, don't you? Because yeast is alive, right?
Well, but that goes back to the whole gray areas thing, because I think from our perspective, you know, the gray areas we jump to are your bivalves and so on. However, for your average non-vegan, their gray area is, you know, a fish or even a chicken, you know? They think, oh, well, cows and pigs, but I don't know about chickens, and oh, yeah, water animals, you know, maybe not.
Well, I think
that's the issue.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, I think if somebody does that to you on the street or anywhere else, I think Reagan's response to that is perfect, because they say, hang on a second, no, you are right that there are gray areas, but it's way below where you're talking. And that brings us back into rights bearers and rights violations in the way that Reagan argued it and said, I'm not disputing that there's going to be some problematic gray areas within animal rights, but it's not where you're saying it is. That's
what do you think about Ronnie's framing?
Kind of putting it through what Ronnie says.
Disagree with it straight before reading it.
Yeah,
but yeah. The whole thing of, you know, if we're talking about a human being who had the same level of awareness as the other animal in question, I mean, isn't that a pretty good way to frame it versus talking about sentience or subject of a life?
Hang on. The question. Well, it's a bit more. It's a bit more complicated when you jump from other animals to humans in this sense, because a lot of moral intuitions and issues are based on the kind of familial relations of that human, which are not tended to kind of extend to other animals. I think.
Could we stop there for a minute? What do you mean by family relations?
Well, it's that idea about you know. I mean, Francione says that you know, if you creep into somebody's room and you shoot them when they're asleep, you've caused no problems, but you know, you haven't violated their rights, except that you've violated their right to live, but you haven't caused them any suffering, right?
Right. Okay, I'm with you on that part.
Yeah. Okay, but. People would immediately start thinking about, oh, well, what about all the suffering of their friends and their family and the people who are going to grieve for them and all that kind of stuff, even workmates, which you tend not to do if you see in a other animal sense. Although I think that actually is problematic because, for example, if I mean the animal rights team were talking about that for tomorrow's show. We were saying that, you know, when you see a dead fox on the sidewalk, as it were, who's been hit by a car, then you might think about, well, what's going on with the fox's partner? What's going on with the fox's cubs? You know, are there some cubs somewhere starving now, and all that? But you know, in terms of the cubs, as it were, getting together and putting together a search party, you don't think, you know. So there's I mean, we're in the minutiae here of animal rights theory, aren't we?
Well, I think that's what we always want to try to create a bit of a marriage between that, or partnership between the theory and the activism. Yeah, so I think it's important to bring it back to that. I guess my thing is, I think when we're put forth that question of, are humans, you know, fill in whatever word, better or whatever, you know, worth more, And people are going to challenge us on that, the burning building scenarios and the rest of it. But I think basic moral level, we need to bring things back to drawing a circle instead of drawing a line. That would be the case I would make today. Because otherwise, why not bees? Then you get your vegans who support using honey and the rest of it. So aren't bees in the gray area by the framing you introduced earlier?
Well, funnily enough, there's a historian called Keith Thomas, and he talks about privileged species, and he's usually talking about pets, animal companions, and he's normally talking about cats, dogs. I think he might use even other animals like hamsters, but the ones that are kept as living ornaments by people. And he was saying that these are privileged species. In terms of the insects, we do seem to have, in the vegan community, we do kind of elevate the moral status of bees a little bit because of the honey question, and that's why. Again, like we're in these terrible kind of areas because we were talking before we came on the air about Joan Denea. Joan Denea is really the only person, not the only person, but the only person who certainly put a book out in which she basically argues for insect rights. Most animal advocates don't want to go there usually, but for tactical reasons. It's not that they don't agree with that; it's just that they don't want to go there. And so I think there's a lot of issues. What does science say? What is the criteria of animal rights? And then also, we as advocates, where do we want to go? Because again, there's a battle of ideas going on, but there's a strategy going on. The people who would want to challenge animal rights, they all want to bring it to the periphery, whereas we want to keep it at the core. Like, for example, Ronnie just said, it's easily proven that most other animals that we oppress are sentient, but we're talking about the ones where there is a shadow of a doubt, and so the answer to that is we give them the benefit of the doubt, isn't it? That's what Reagan said, and that's what we normally do. Well, but we don't dispute that there's no shadow of a doubt, though, do we?
To Deb's point, I mean, I think the analysis we're going to does complicate the issue, and I appreciate there's an element that's needed for that. The thing I would suggest, if people do come at us with the insect stuff or the rest of it, engage in that conversation. I mean, I think honestly the conversations I've had with people, be them vegan or non-vegan, if they're thinking about whether insects are aware, they're very, very open to the animal rights message, and it could actually be quite a productive thing. Now, I'm not talking about the whole crop deaths and those types of dismissive type positions that people throw at you, but they don't actually really want to engage with, which does happen. But some people who raise it, I think, are genuinely interested. And if we can say, well, to your point, like engage with it, but I just don't think that should be our opening move.
No, well, I might agree with that. Going to Deb's comment here, that's what you're doing, isn't it?
Making them some type of monolith?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, though. Should we just focus on the individuality? I mean, if we say, let's talk about a fish, let's talk about a chicken, why not just talk about them both as individuals?
Whoa, hang on a minute. You just contradicted yourself in one sentence there, haven't you? I mean, like, should we focus on individuality? No, we should focus on them being individuals.
Well, I'm just saying, like, to build a case for turkeys and build a case for water animals, like, to me, we should just talk about all animals, unique individuals, worthy of respect. And I think that curbs a lot of these challenges that I think we're going to get.
Our difficulty as advocates or philosophers or whatever you want to say is that given the theory of animal rights, there are some other animals who don't kind of qualify. And I know that's kind of difficult, but it's also kind of true. And what Reagan does is kind of acknowledge the gray area. And as we said before we came on air, one of the problems for Tom Reagan, he was too bloody honest half the time. And so he would say, when things were difficult, I mean, like, the modern day way of being on the street is you've got to know all the answers. Joey Carbstrong kind of indexicality. Oh, well, you're going to say that, I'll answer with this. And you say that, I'll answer with that. Whereas Reagan would go, well, actually, that's quite a difficult question. And, we're not quite sure. Science is not quite sure. What we need in that respect is we need people of goodwill to come together in order to forge a solution. However, that's not true if you're talking about the core of animal rights, which are the beings who are definitely sentient or definitely subject to a life. And so that's when we come to this narrow gray area, that's where, I mean, that's what we're discussing. That's what we've been discussing for half an hour.
Well, because everyone's kind of making a similar point that it's the sentience, not the being classified as an animal. I mean, I guess I kind of lean more towards what Ronnie's previous comment, talking about awareness. To me, awareness is a much more universally understood concept than sentience, and certainly more. I don't know how many people could articulate subject of a life in a meaningful way, because subject of a life excludes, water animals and stuff, right? I know why Reagan did it, but mammals are of a year or older. I mean, I appreciated that with it, making the case for them, and then okay, these other ones will be kind of given the benefit of the doubt.
You know as well as I do that Reagan kind of moved a little bit on subject of a life, and even right at the end, I mean, the last words of this, he says, well, okay, I've been talking about mammals 1 year and older, but actually, I know already that we're going to be talking about birds, we're going to be talking about fishes, so. That's a bit disingenuous. Put it back to debates.
Put it back to debates. Well, I'm just saying, if we're going to use the subject of life framing, I don't think we can use, because I was relieved to get to the end of the case and see that written. It's just if we talk for 400 pages about what subject of life is and then qualified at the end, I think that's not necessarily. That's where I would kind of move away from that kind of framing.
Well, everybody has. Nobody. I mean, do you know an animal advocate who talks about subject of a life? I mean, can anybody point to...
I feel like I did at the start when I was on the street trying out some Reagan stuff and trying to apply it to live conversations.
You used it, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to ponder the specifics, but...
There was something that Race Lever said before I want to go...
Is this the hierarchy?
No.
So what's the problem with hierarchy as long as... Well, maybe we can just address this real quickly, because I think the thing with hierarchy is vegans would draw the line where race and where I assume we would, but I think non-vegans, when we start getting into this hierarchy stuff, that's all of a sudden where your water animals and certain other individuals drop off because of their species membership. I think that's to me, I think, where the confusion goes.
I think that when people go to the periphery, what we should challenge is them going to the periphery, because they're doing it tactically. But we don't have to pretend that the periphery or the grey area is not there. But we have to challenge them going to it. I mean, they're going to it because they think that they can throw the baby out with the bathwater, that they can find a little chink in the armor, and that therefore means that the entire case for animal rights falls, which is kind of what Pat Kenny was doing in the clip. He was going, well, what about WASP? And what, they're kind of going, okay, haha, got you kind of thing. Well, it's not a gotcha. But I don't think the solution is just to kind of claim that those kind of difficult areas don't exist.
Well, similar to the questionable sentience, we could talk about questionable awareness. I still think we should simplify our framing, because I think, to Ronnie's point, how do we make a rational case for a species hierarchy? Because it's all through a human-centric lens, which often lends itself to human superiority, saying, "Oh, okay, they don't have these observations." What's that?
What do you mean by hierarchy? What I'm saying is that these people, such as Reagan, are just saying that there are some other animals who are sentient, and there are some other animals who are not sentient, and that makes a moral difference, because that's the case for animal rights.
Yeah, and I think there's different things that you do in a philosophy book versus on the street.
Even welfare, though, Jeremy, like the case for animal welfare is you can be cruel to some. If you can't be cruel to one, there's no issue then, is there? You can't be cruel to plants. And then, well, can you be cruel to flies? These are issues that science have not really fully resolved. Now,
another reason not to talk about cruelty.
No, I'm just illustrating the fact that we've got criteria, whether it's welfare or rights, we've got criteria, and the criteria is those who can suffer and be oppressed and all that versus those who cannot suffer, and you cannot oppress a plant.
Well, and here's to Maz's point, because we often do talk as a movement a lot about pain, fear, and suffering. I think the thing I would kind of question that is, are we inviting people to make more of an animal welfare response versus an animal rights response? Because if we're removing the pain, removing the fear, removing the suffering, we can still use them. So I think that's kind of the thrust of a lot of this.
Yeah,
just
well, I mean,
really objective, clear point making.
Yeah,
if all animals. Go ahead.
Well, that is a very interesting point that Maz has raised there, because, I always, I remember my consciousness on this kind of arose when the Shack campaign started, which shut Huntington animal, Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty.
Animal cruelty.
Yeah, and I could never understand why they put animal cruelty on the C. And I was thinking, well, if they came to us and say, well, we've got rid of the cruelty, that wouldn't satisfy us, except that I think the response from a vegan point of view is, well, you can't do, because use is cruelty, whereas from a rights base, use is a rights violation.
We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? About the end suffering versus end exploitation, and how actually the subjective language leads to subjective results.
Yeah. And also, I mean, obviously this one is complicated too, because I mean, Reagan goes into this because he talks about the difference between deprivation, suffering, pain, these kind of things. So you can still have your rights violated if you're not put into pain, or you're not made to suffer. But that's a grey area in itself, because say, for example, you have the basis of imprisonment is that you're deprived of your liberty. Okay, now that in a way does make you suffer, but it doesn't put you in pain. So there's a lot of nuances here, I think.
Well, and to Erfin's point, I think talking about our own speciesism, because I think similar to how we probably save a family member in these thought experiments to a stranger, I think it's really important to redirect if we get challenged on this kind of stuff, that, we might have an answer to that, but that doesn't actually apply to the question we're discussing, whether or not we should oppose animal use. That's where I think these types of thought experiments, which I know we get, I'm sure you get them on the street too, of, well, if a human's drowning and a dog's drowning kind of thing.
I'm not convinced by this, because right from the 1980s, when these kind of lifeboat, philosophical kind of scenarios kind of come up, thought experiments. A lot of people would say, well, if it's my dog or some stranger, I would save the dog. And then Reagan in the Late Show said, well, what if we're talking about Hitler or Blondie? Which one of those would we save? The way I tell you what, the way it used to be framed is, if
I like that counter, by the way.
if there was two beings in a river, that we will often call, you see two beings in a river. One was a kitten and one was a baby. Who would you save first? And I used to say, I would hope that the first being that I came across was the kitten, as I was swimming towards into the river, because I could grab the kitten and throw the kitten onto the bank, and she would be okay with that. If I came across the baby, the idea of throwing the baby onto the bank would probably kill them, and so that would complicate the issue. But obviously, the vegan response to that scenario, that kind of thought experiment, is we would try to save both. Then you get Tobias Leonhards of the world going, oh no, you can only save one. Which one, kind of thing. But it's not as clear cut as we'd always choose the human, because we've got relationships as well.
I think to your point earlier, I think it's good, like Reagan did in that clip, to be a bit charitable. I just think it's really important that we redirect back very quickly to very objective framework, because falsificationism, that's I don't know if I've seen this name before. That's cool. What do we think about animals that have a definitionally so-called parasitic or dangerous relation to humans?
This is self-defense, this, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say self-defense, and that would apply to regardless of species membership. if there is more of a self-defense type thing. I think mice is it's probably a bit more easy to relocate them. / why are they there in the first place? Mosquitoes and ticks less so. I mean, I know I've picked ticks off the pigs at friend. So
On the relocation.
Wait, let me get ready.
If we get this idea of relocation of mice, I think this is going to come up tomorrow as well on the show. If you humanely trap a mouse and then take her to 3 miles away or whatever the criteria is that they don't come back, what about the babies or the family left behind? So it's not that simple in terms of mice. And
better than killing them, surely.
Oh yeah. It's just that it's you're still not out of the moral woods by doing that.
What? So like dogs and cats are they're kind of caught between worlds, and we do the best we can, right?
Yeah. Well, as Gary Francione once famously said, that society, speciesist culture, forces us against our better interest to be utilitarian now and again, but even when we don't want to be. We're kind of forced into it, which is, spay and neuter, for example. I mean, that's a classic thing. It's a rights violation to spay and neuter, but we all do it, and we all think it's a good idea.
That's really tricky territory, isn't it?
We've been on tricky territory since we started.
Pick the subject. Yeah, to Eliot's point about natural rights pre-existing before Reagan's ideas, that's an interesting one. Because I think the thing is animal rights, I mean, the whole thrust behind the show is the fact it's used rhetorically, which is something to unpack. But I think you ask 100 animal advocates their view of animal rights, you're gonna get 100 different answers. There might be some similarities, but...
What Eliot says here is quite complicated in the sense that, again, if you go back to that summary that I mentioned before, he says that natural rights theory is what is the basis of animal rights theory. But again, things would have moved on. I mean, sociologists tend to think of rights as a social construct nowadays, and of course that does mean that people can therefore kind of deconstruct them again, which of course is right. I mean, rights are just an idea; they don't exist in nature. But the natural rights thing, or the divine rights, it's something I had to try and kind of grapple with in my PhD is, what are rights and where do they come from? Because a lot of people solve that by going, we get rights from God. Well, obviously, in the modern day, that doesn't fly, So
we're talking about flies now, are we?
No.
Oh. To Eliot's point, to me the discussion including all animals more came after. Would that be fair? Talking more about your Joan Denayers and so on. Well,
obviously there's the famous Bridget Brophy article, which is called Animal Rights, and I think 1965 in the Sunday Times. I'm not quite sure whether she included all other animals. There's also Henry Salt, who was kind of classified as a rights-based person, but then Donald Watson pointed out that Henry Salt actually mocked vegans because he thought that drinking cow milk was okay.
Well, did Ryder, when I would need to study it, but would Ryder have framed speciesism around all species? Presumably that would have been the framing initially, and that was in the 70s, wasn't it?
1970, yeah, speciesism, yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's
all species. It's not just speciesism for mammals or anything, is it?
Yeah, no, well, that's right. But Ryder would have also acknowledged that there are problematic areas, these grey areas again. But I mean, no, again, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, Nybert's got a good take on Ryder, because a sociologist tends to see speciesism as an ideology and a culture, whereas what Ryder framed it a little bit more like it's an individual prejudice that individuals have, whereas obviously and so it's akin to racism and sexism. But again, racism, sexism are not just on the individual level either. So again, that's a complicated issue, that one. There's been a whole series of complicated issues today, folks.
That's what complicated questions we could have titled it. Well, this is interesting. If we take sentience out of it, I mean, and this is something I've actually pondered this myself, is actually talking about insects. If that actually, so-called raises all the boats, like, are we actually going to get people to think about cows, pigs, and so on in a different way if we can make a case for them? That's why I'm kind of moving more towards this all animals framing. All animals experience life, aware, and so on.
One argument, of course, is that if you can get people to care morally for other animals, they would then a knock-on effect up, as it were, to humans. So I suppose that's the same type of idea, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of going through the comments so people on different platforms can kind of see the different comments. But yeah, I mean, what's your takeaway from all this? If you happy with the way the movement kind of frames species?
Can you go back to Bernie's one? But Bernie, the argument would be that you cannot torment plants. You can damage them, but the idea of torment would then start to involve ideas about oppression, exploitation, cause them pain. I mean, you can cause them to be less healthy, okay, but in a kind of plant sense, they're not feeling less healthy, and they're not struggling because of that. I mean, see, even that, complicated, because
we're not dismantling the plants have feelings thing, are we?
They are struggling.
No brain, no central nervous system. To me, it's pretty.
They are struggling to live, aren't they? But they're not suffering. So, are they being tormented? That's an interesting word, torment. Can you torment a plant? Do you think plants?
Do we even want to talk about suffering? Because to me, talking about suffering moves towards suffering reduction or suffering elimination.
I'm just asking you a question. Don't jump onto the word suffering. I'm just saying, can you torment a plant? Do you think?
Well, the point that's been raised internally within the team that I think is quite interesting is, why not have respect for plants? Like, why not embrace that? Because we can still talk about feed conversion ratios and say, hey, you know what? If you don't want to torment plants, best thing to do is to eat plants directly.
Did Jeremy answer the question, anybody? No. Can plants be tormented? Jeremy Hess.
Well, I mean, no brain, no central nervous system. I would argue no.
Okay. Next question. Can insentient other animals be tormented?
I would argue there's no. I would never use the framing insentient other animals. I don't think it exists. I think it would be speciesist to make the claim that there's insentient other animals.
Well, I mean, I think you'd be in danger of being called one of these woo-woo people and all that if you did that. Because
why don't we talk about bivalves? I mean, they have nerve ganglia and cerebral ganglia. I've interacted with slugs, and you can see their little eyes retract into their head when they hear noises or that kind of thing. They're clearly interacting with their environment. There's footage of clams flapping through the water. I don't know that we can necessarily to automatically pin they're not sentient. Is maybe we just don't know. Why assume no?
There's footage of plants turning towards the sun and tracking the sun, and also I
feel like I'm having a street outreach conversation.
I mean, some people argue that that plants, like certainly in a forest, right, that they invented the internet because they communicate between their roots and everything, and they can warn each other of dangers and this kind of stuff. Some people argue all that.
Well, I think when we're talking about that, we're not getting to the root of the issue. People are taking us off.
Yeah, the checks in the post. Yeah.
I'm not sure what we've resolved with this one. So it's out. Maybe this would be an interesting one to frame as a debate some week. But I guess you're advocating for line drawing. I'm advocating for circle drawing. Is what it sounds like is the key difference. If I were to frame our positions,
I wouldn't necessarily go for the human. I got to admit, and I think, ironically, a lot of vegans would say that. I mean, I know.
Yeah, getting the misanthropy and some of that with some of that too. I think
that's right. Yeah, but I mean, like, why would you? And then of course the problem is the dog scenario in the case, you would go for the human a million times. So this is where, you know.
Well, and that's where I think to really strip away at our own speciesism and to really just see them as individuals in different bodies, that's where I would like to kind of approach some of these things. Now, obviously, when we're engaging with non-vegans on the street, we have to be tactful about what's going to be translatable to them.
Oh, you think?
But yeah, why not? Why not give it a try?
Yeah, tactful. I mean, no, but the thing is, going back to that question there, I mean, I wonder what everybody in the chat would think. I mean, would they automatically, you know, all things being equal, would they automatically go for the human? Because that's always been, you know, one of the kind of moral dilemmas that have been put to animal people. Because really, what they're looking for is for you to say, no, I wouldn't, and therefore they can call you an extremist and all the rest of it.
Well, and I think to Ervin's point, though, I wouldn't stay on. I mean, that thought experiment, I'd acknowledge, like, I'd probably say of a dog I know over a human I don't. But that doesn't have anything.
You're moving.
Two strangers. I know.
You're moving ground. You do that a lot. You shift ground and then you answer a question that wasn't.
Well, I'm trying to shift to the ground we need to discuss. I don't know. Well, because I guess from a anti-speciesist perspective, you'd argue that the human's going to cause more harm than the dog, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
for the purposes of a thought experiment, yeah, you'd argue climate change.
Yeah, from the position of Gaia, to use that phrase, you would always choose the non-human because humans are so damaging. It's the same, you know, there's a desert island thing about, you know, there's a single rabbit and there's a human being. Who would you eat first? Waiting for being rescued. Well, it would make more sense to kill and eat the human because they're bigger, and so you might not have to kill both of them than waiting for, you know, because you've got more time between killing number one and number two. You get what I'm saying? Then
I think we're opening the door to cows eating cows instead of chickens and that kind of thing. I don't know where those kind of conversations get us. To me, it's give a short response and immediately redirect to the core issue. Because to Tom's point, that's problematic to derive conclusions about morality from isolated moral dilemmas, and not just isolated, but extreme, likely never to exist moral dilemmas. And it's your point. That's where people try to pull us, but we've got to pull them back to reality, as it were.
Well, that's what I said at the beginning. But I mean, Tom's right. I mean, you know, people. I mean, this is a question of extremists. You know, this idea.
We are extremists, right?
No, extremists, and so it's that issue that, you know. These interesting philosophical debates and everything don't really apply to the general scheme of things, which is what Tom Reagan said right at the end of that clip.
Yeah, and I guess my point is to basically swerve the conversation we're having today when we're discussing with non-vegans. I think we're gonna get ourselves into a lot less complicated water if we do that. But that's gonna. I mean, that has got a real link to the fact that you're probably going to be trying to get onto the Michelle Lowe thing at 7 o'clock, talking about the. Yeah, it's gonna be coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, the H word.
The H word, hummus. Yeah.
So it's one thing. It's one thing to have a conversation within the movement, and it's another thing to what you want to communicate to the public. So yeah, I agree with that. Obviously, I mean, we're talking about, because we're seed planters, we're talking about we need to have communication skills and all that. And so you've got to kind of weigh up, you know, and you only got to use your social skills. In other words, you try and weigh up. You kind of almost, I mean, I know this is a terrible thing to say, but you kind of, when people approach you on the street, you kind of try to see how open they are, but you are trying to judge their intelligence as well. And then
intelligence? What kind of intelligence? I would argue emotional intelligence over anything.
Yeah, but
not cognitive book smarts or any of that.
Yeah, okay, well, all right, let's go for emotional intelligence. But what I'm saying is that if you make that judgment, that means that you can say different things to some people, and then you tend to think, well, I need to simplify my language, or I can get away with saying this. I mean, there are some people that you could talk to about subject of life or sentience. Other people you couldn't. You kind of make on a social animal interaction type level. You try to make these kind of ethno type judgments about people. You just do that. I mean, that's what humans do, which is why we kind of adjust our talk to the other person that's in front of us. We just do that automatically.
To Wendy's point, what do you think about the social ramifications of prioritizing another species over a human? And in the subsequent example, you're driving a car and at a human or a fox, there'll be tougher consequences if you kill the human, and certainly in the legal sense, but even in the moral sense, to the earlier comment. So there's a lot of pressure. There's pressure that reinforces our own speciesism, isn't there?
Yeah,
as if we don't have enough of it already.
I think what Wendy's got in mind there is Tom Reagan on the moral maze, because he gets asked that question. That if it came across another animal who is soon to die, would you, as it were, put them out of the misery? And Reagan said that would be a merciful thing to do. I said it. I said the word. And so that would be a merciful thing to do. And then the guy goes, well, you know, if you did that to a human, you'd be charged with murder.
Did you say mercy?
Have mercy.
Right, I'm going. I'll see you next week, folks.
On that point, well, as Wendy says, that's a very difficult question. Oh, this has been a bit messy, but I've enjoyed the chat at least. I'm gonna keep advocating for my circle drawing instead of line drawing, but.
Well, you're always going in circles, so I'm not quite sure. I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, I'm just catching up on some of the comments. I mean, I think it's difficult. I think when you get into these nuanced peripheral discussions, I find them to be more distracting. I mean, it seems like as a movement we love thought experiments. I find them to be a complete distraction.
They are.
And I think that's well, isn't species hierarchy a thought experiment?
No.
Tell me how you really feel. Isn't it to Ronnie's point though? Isn't it speciesist to imply there's a hierarchy depending on someone's species?
Yeah. I mean, I don't like the word hierarchy, obviously, but there's a divide between, in the theory, those who are sentient and those who are not. Now, you're trying to get around that problem by putting your arm around the insentient. That's not what the theorists have done. You're trying to. But, you know, all I'm saying is as soon as you do that, you then get into difficulties, as it were, a bit more down the line, because people are going to bring up plants and all the rest of it. So you're kind of, again, I'm going to use a hierarchical language, which I don't like doing, but, you know, you're moving the argument down the scale a little bit.
I'm arguing there shouldn't be a scale.
No, but I think
to Nella's point, I think this is a really good caveat to add to these thought experiments. It's just because I would choose that. It's not because they have less moral value. It's because of our relationship to that.
Yeah, and that should be the same as if you do. But they see that's Reagan's point. You know, if you do swim out to the baby and save them, it's not because you don't think the kitten has any moral value. I mean that's Francione's book, isn't it? You know, your child or the dog. You know, we expect people. I mean, society expects people for you to save your child over the dog. And there's, you know, not quite sure whether the dog is a family dog or a dog, a street dog, you know, whoever, right? But we expect people to save the human.
Well, and to that point, I mean, I do think to answer human. And in these thought experiments has a tinge of speciesism to it. Like why? Because they have the capability to go on and do something great, and this other animal doesn't. I think
that's exactly why this question is posed to us, Jeremy. Because what they want you to do is not say human, so then they can go, "Oh, you're just one of these fanatics."
Shouldn't we be prepared to respond to that though? And I mean, we could fire right back with the whole, you know, well, if we want to talk about fanatical, let's talk about 3 trillion individuals killed, killed, all that.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
We're going to get that either way. I mean, regardless if we lead with sentience or, you know, line drawing sentience or circle drawing awareness.
This is going to be the new theory of our lives, folks. It's all based on a circle. No, what's it? The new seekers. All my life's a circle. I'll send you the link to that song.
Oh, here, Ronnie. Ronnie's got an extra addition to the thought experiment. The vivisector. What would you think, dog or vivisector? Who are you saving, Ron? You with Ronnie on that?
I mean, that's similar to what Reagan was getting at when he said, "Well, what about Hitler or Blondie?"
Well, I really think we should focus on Elliot's point here.
you're just looking through us. Oh, right. Oh, I see you. I'm just saying, you're just trying to search for somebody who agrees with you. I mean, that's exactly what you did. You're so transparent, my lad.
It seems like there's a general theme here to be transparent about that there is different decisions we would make, but just to frame things in a way. Oh, it looks like you've got one too. It's been spread around.
Team Rog, USA. What's going on now? Have I lost sound? Maybe you just stopped talking.
I'm just reading the comments. That's when you're supposed to fill the space.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so we are up on the hour, so we should wrap up. Have you seen any other comments? I'm kind of blitzing through these to try to so nothing's missed, but I think.
Yeah, I mean, Amber's point is right, which is why, but the point is, it's not really a genuine question when you get asked that question. They're just trying to put you on some kind of terrible hook to make you look bad or something, or they want to make you say something. Oh, well, you don't really care about them after all. Or, it's a trick. I mean, it's a trick question. I mean, that's why bloody Leonard uses these bloody things all the time to get vegans to say, yes, I'd eat a steak and all that bullshit. I mean, like you said 10 minutes ago, these scenarios are not that good for us to deal with the real world. I mean, they're very good. They're very good in, in philosophy classes. The trolley problem. What will you do about that? I mean, that's all very well and good. But in terms of in terms of the real world, how many times have you ever found yourself in charge of a lever that's going to change the direction of a train? I'd imagine that nobody on this call has ever been in that situation. But that's the trolley question. All philosophy students do that in their first seminar. Who would you save? These are just thought experiments.
Yeah, and I think that's just it. That's kind of my point. Is I would encourage us to pull non-vegans we engage with out of the philosophy classroom and into the real world, and talk about those ideas, but don't not get stuck on them. I'd move away from talking about putting anyone on a hook, because that has some speciesist implications, I reckon. But
Daily Roger, what's that mean? Daily Roger, Daily at Roger. What's that mean? What do you mean, Wendy McGowan?
I believe it's McGovern.
Oh yes, it is.
We should wrap this up. We've got 6:00 show tomorrow that you said kind of similar themes around relations with our fellow animals, free living beings, and so on.
Yeah, it's going to cover areas like crop deaths and things about how can moving towards a vegan future, what would that kind of look like in terms of our inevitable impact on the world, because we all know that by just living we're going to have an impact on the world. As you said a few minutes ago, unfortunately human beings, we have a terrible impact on the world, especially first world human beings. I mean, look at the environmental cost of us compared with other animals. So a vegan world, is that going to change? Are we going to be able to reduce our footprint? I mean,
hopefully it helps to start the change, but it's certainly not. It's not the complete solution, because veganism in itself.
No problem. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think Wendy was referring to the trolley problem she faces daily.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, there is at 7:00 the discussion on what's it called? Open mic, have your say on the H word. So I know I'm going to plan to take part in that, and I'm curious to see how the conversation goes. So hopefully we can move towards at least understanding. And I don't know if we'll ever arrive at a conclusion, but
yeah, I like hummus, so that's my sort of thing.
Yeah, I like hummus too. Baba Ganoush in
we
a pinch.
both agree on the H word then, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. All right, maybe we leave it there. So please join us on Michelle Lowe's channel in 50 minutes. And it sounds like you may tune into that as well, Roger, maybe from a viewer perspective, and just see what happens, as I'm sure a lot of people probably will.
Don't worry. If you get on, I'm going to hassle you in the comments like you always do.
I know you will. I know you will.
Yes,
goes around, comes around.
When you said it was a joke, but sorry, Wendy, I just don't get it. I still don't get it now. So you'll have to message me because I'm just not good at it.
You're gonna have to explain it.
My problem and not yours. So everybody else got the joke, I didn't. So there you go. And there's me. I taught the sociology of humor. I don't get the joke. I can analyze the joke, but I don't get it. Cut me off.
We'll see you next time tomorrow, 6 p.m. With the team show, and in less than an hour on Michelle Lowe's channel. Talk to you soon.
See you then.